Prologue. 1858, United States Senate Chamber. Imagine the Senate Chamber in Washington. Senator James Hammond of South Carolina rises to the podium. His speech will go down in history. You dare not make war upon cotton. No power on earth dares to make war upon it. Cotton is king. This was not empty rhetoric. By 1860, cotton made up 60% of all American exports. The United States produced 3/4 of the world's cotton. British textile mills, the engine of the Industrial Revolution, depended on American cotton for 80% of their supply. The entire global economy was tied to the white fields of the American South. But behind this wealth stood a dark reality. 4 million enslaved people whose combined value, $3.5 billion, exceeded the worth of all the railroads, all the factories, and all the banks in America combined. This is the story of how slavery was not a relic of the past, but the driving force of the most modern capitalism of the 19th century. 1793, the invention that doomed millions. In 1793, a young schoolteacher from New England named Eli Whitney was visiting a plantation in Georgia. There, he heard complaints about how long and painful it was to separate cotton fibers from seeds by hand. One person could process only a pound of cotton a day. Whitney came up with a simple machine, the cotton gin. It did the work 50 times faster. Many people think this invention should have reduced the need for enslaved labor. The opposite happened. Before the gin, the United States produced 3,000 bales of cotton a year, an insignificant amount. After the gin, an exponential revolution began. 1820, 335,000 bales. 1840, 1.35 million bales. 1860, 4.5 million bales. A 1,500-fold increase in 60 years. But who picked this cotton? The number of enslaved people rose from 700,000 in 1790 to 4 million by 1860. Technology did not liberate, it enslaved even more. Geography of expansion. The march west cotton quickly exhausts soil. After 10 to 15 years, yields drop by half. The system required constant territorial expansion. Planters moved west like locusts, devouring virgin land. In 1800, major production was in Georgia and South Carolina. By 1860, the center had shifted: Alabama, Mississippi, Louisiana, Texas. These were the most profitable lands. A plantation in the Mississippi Delta produced 12–15% annual profit, fantastic returns. But this expansion meant a nightmare for hundreds of thousands of people. They were forcibly relocated from the old states to the new ones. This was one of the largest forced migrations in history, the internal slave trade, which we will discuss later. Let's look inside a large plantation. Let's break down in detail the economy of a typical large plantation in Mississippi in 1855. Its owner, let's call him John Richardson, inherited a small fortune and decided to invest in cotton. His investments: bought 2,000 acres of land, $20,000, bought 100 enslaved people, $120,000, average price, $200 per person. Built living barracks, barns, a cotton press, $10,000, total investment, $150,000. This is a huge amount. For comparison, a skilled craftsman in the North earned $500 a year. That is, the investment equaled 300 years of work of an ordinary person. Annual production: 100 workers working from dawn to dusk in the harvest season, August-December, collect about 100 bales of cotton at 500 pounds each. This is 50,000 pounds. The price of cotton fluctuates, but on average 10–12 cents per pound. At 11 cents, the gross income is $500. Expenses: clothing and basic food for 100 people. $18 per person equals $1,800 per year, minimum of survival. Salary of the overseer and manager: $1,000, tools, equipment repairs, $500, taxes and miscellaneous, $300, total expenses, $3,600. Net profit, $1,900 per year. This gives a profit rate of about 1.3%. Sounds terrible, but this is only the beginning of the calculation. Hidden economy: people as growing assets. Here is what made the system so profitable. The value of enslaved people was constantly growing. From 1800 to 1860, prices increased 4 to 5 times. This meant growth of 4,005% per year, more than the interest on a loan. If Richardson bought 100 people for $120,000 in 1850, then by 1860 they were worth $180,000. Plus, in 10 years, 20 children were born, who also became his property, worth another $20,000, $30,000. Profit from cotton: $1,900 per year times 10 years, or $19,000. Growth of the value of the labor force: $60,000. Value of children born: $25,000. Total profit over 10 years: $104,000. Annual profit rate about 7%. This is excellent profitability. For comparison, railroads gave 5–6%, factories 6–7%, government bonds 4–5%. The problem of capital. Let's go back to our Richardson. Where did he get $150,000? Few people had that much money in cash. The answer? He took a loan. And here begins the most interesting part. The slaveholding economy created a sophisticated financial system. Mortgage on people. Richardson went to a bank in Natchez. The banker assessed his purchase, 100 healthy people of working age. Appraisal, $120,000. The bank issued a loan of 60% of the appraisal, $72,000 at 10% annual interest for 5 years. Here is the document Richardson signed. I'm quoting a typical contract of that time. John Richardson pledges the following property. Slaves by the name of Tom, age 24, Sarah, age 20, Jake, age 30, and so on through the list of all 100 people with indication of age, sex, physical condition. If Richardson did not pay, the bank had the right to confiscate and sell the people at auction. And banks regularly did this. Where did the money come from? Follow the chain. The bank in Natchez was a provincial bank in Mississippi. Where did it get millions for loans? It received them from New York. Large New York banks lent to Southern banks, which in turn lent to planters. But even that was not all. New York banks received capital from London. British investment houses invested in American bonds secured by Southern plantations. This created a global financial chain. London, New York, Natchez, Planter, Cotton, Liverpool, London. The entire system was closed. British factories bought cotton produced by labor financed by British capital itself. Insurance, even death was a business. Imagine, you are a banker and you issued a loan of $72,000 secured by 100 people. What if someone dies, or escapes, or an uprising occurs? You lose the collateral. You need insurance. A whole insurance industry developed. Large companies, many still exist under other names, offered policies, life insurance. Annual premium, 2.5% of value. For a person worth $1,200, this is $30 per year. Covered death from illness, accident. Did not cover death from punishment by the owner escape insurance. Annual premium, 4% of value. For a person worth $2,100, this is $48 per year. Payout was 80% of the value with confirmed escape. Required proof of proper supervision. Transport insurance for transport by sea from Virginia to New Orleans. Premium, 7% of cargo value. Covered death from shipwreck, illness, uprising en route. Companies kept mortality statistics by region, age, type of work. This was actuarial science applied to human lives. 1808, the ban that changed everything. In 1808, the United States banned the import of slaves from Africa. The northern states achieved this compromise when the Constitution was adopted. Many thought it was the beginning of the end of slavery, but the economy found another way. A gigantic internal market developed. The logic was simple. In the old states, Virginia, Maryland, the soil was exhausted. Tobacco plantations brought less income. In the new states, Mississippi, Alabama, virgin lands and the cotton boom created enormous demand. Prices reflected this difference. A healthy 25-year-old man in Virginia, $800. The same man in New Orleans, $2,400. Difference, $600 in pure profit on each person. The scale of the catastrophe. From 1820 to 1860, about 1 million people were forcibly moved from the Upper South to the Deep South. The pace grew. 1820s, 15,000 people per year. 1830s, 30,000 people per year. 1850s, 60,000 people per year. The mechanics of the trade. Professional slave traders created a streamlined system. Let's take a real company. Franklin and Armfield, the largest slave trading company of the 1830s. Their business model, Isaac Franklin was in Alexandria, Virginia. He bought people from bankrupt planters, from heirs at local auctions. Average price, $700, $900. Then they gathered them into groups of 100 to 200 people. Men were shackled, chained together. The caravan walked on foot, 1,000 miles from Virginia to Natchez, Mississippi. The journey took 6 to 8 weeks. John Armfield waited in Natchez. He had showrooms, literally showrooms, where buyers could inspect the goods. People were forced to smile, show strength, prove health. Average selling price, with $300 to $1,500. They earned $500, $700 on each person. Per season, 3 or 4 caravans a year, they transported 1,000 to 200 people. Annual profit, $500,000 to $700,000. Franklin and Armfield became millionaires. In today's money, their fortune is estimated at $200 to $300 million, the destruction of families. Here is what made this system especially cruel. Families were torn apart. Young men and women were the most valuable. Children and the elderly were left in Virginia. They were worth less, not profitable to transport. A mother watched her 20-year-old son being taken away in chains. A husband saw his wife sold. Children lost their parents. and they knew they would never see each other again. A distance of 1,000 miles at that time meant forever. Myth of clean hands. There is a convenient myth. Slavery was a Southern problem, and the North opposed it. The reality is more complicated. The Northern economy was deeply intertwined with slavery and profited enormously from it. New England Textile Mills, Lowell, Massachusetts, 1850s. A city of textile mills. Huge brick buildings, thousands of spindles, tens of thousands of workers. It was the pride of American industry, the showcase of capitalism. What powered those spindles? Cotton picked by enslaved people on plantations 1,500 miles to the south. By 1860, New England had 564 textile mills. They processed 400 million pounds of cotton annually, employed 122,000 workers, produced fabric worth $115 million, earned $45–50 million in profit per year. 100% of their raw material came from slave-owning plantations. When the Civil War began and the Union blockade cut off Southern cotton supplies, New England's textile industry nearly shut down. It was called the Cotton Famine. Tens of thousands of workers lost their jobs. Factory owners understood this. Many of them publicly opposed the abolition of slavery. They called themselves cotton Whigs. To them, abolitionists were a threat to their business. Wall Street was built on cotton. New York was the financial capital of the cotton economy. By 1860, 40% of all New York bank loans were tied in some way to the cotton trade. Factoring, the heart of the system. Between the planter and the cotton buyer stood intermediaries, factors. These were trading houses based in New York, but with agents in the South. How it worked. The planter sends cotton to a factor in New York. The factor sells the cotton in Liverpool. The factor keeps a 2.5% commission. The rest is sent back to the planter, but factors did more. Provided advances against future harvests at 12% annually. Bought equipment and enslaved people for planters, 5% commission. Insured shipments, 3 to 4% premium. Transferred money, 1% fee. The largest factoring firms controlled hundreds of plantations and handled millions of dollars. Their annual profits reached $300,000, $500,000 per firm. Port of New York. 60% of American cotton exports passed through the Port of New York, even though the cotton grew 1,500 miles to the south. Why? New York controlled finance, shipping, and insurance. Cotton was transported from New Orleans or Charleston to New York, and from there to Liverpool. Every movement generated revenue. Port fees, warehousing, loading and unloading, customs procedures, insurance. New York earned $30 to $40 million a year from cotton. This was 25–30% of the city's entire economy, not passive victims. History often portrays enslaved people as passive victims. This is a distortion. They resisted constantly, and that resistance had serious economic impact. Slowdowns, a quiet weapon. Overseers constantly complained. Workers were lazy, slow, stupid. But this was not natural sluggishness. It was a tactic. Researchers compared the productivity of enslaved labor with the productivity of free labor after 1865. They found that with the same number of workers, output increased by 20–30%. This means that during slavery, productivity was intentionally reduced by the same amount. They did it intelligently. Worked just enough to avoid punishment, pretended not to understand instructions. Faked illness or fatigue. Accidentally made mistakes. Cumulative effect. The system lost $150 million in potential output annually. This was 15–20% of all value created by the system. Sabotage, a direct blow. A more direct form of resistance was sabotage of tools and equipment. Accidents were far too frequent. Axes and hoes accidentally broke. Horses and mules were accidentally injured. Wagons overturned. Irrigation systems clogged. Planters noticed this. Their letters are full of complaints about workers' clumsiness and carelessness. One planter wrote, "In the past month we have lost 3 plows, 4 axes, 1 mule, as if someone deliberately..." That is exactly what happened. Deliberately. Estimated damage from sabotage, $5 to $8 million a year across the South. Arson. The fire of vengeance. The most dangerous form of resistance was arson. Cotton burns extremely well. Wooden buildings ignite instantly. Newspapers documented about 300 to 400 arson cases per year. The real number was much higher. Many were concealed to avoid causing panic. Typical scenario. Middle of the night. Fire in a cotton warehouse or in a field before harvest. Losses. $5,000, $10,000 per plantation. The guilty were almost never found. After a particularly successful arson, insurance premiums in the county would jump 50 to 100%. Planters suffered a double blow, direct damage plus higher insurance costs. Escapes, and I'm voting with their feet. Every escape was a direct economic hit. A planter lost a capital asset worth $800 to $1,500 plus future productivity. It is estimated that 1,000, 2,000 people escaped successfully each year. But there were far more attempts, tens of thousands. Even an unsuccessful attempt created costs. Time spent searching, rewards to catchers, punishment discouraged others but reduced the productivity of the captured person. The Underground Railroad. This was not an actual railroad, but a network of secret routes and safe houses that helped fugitives reach the North and Canada. It was organized by Quakers, free black people, and white abolitionists. Estimates vary widely, from 30,000 to 100,000 people over its entire history. Even the conservative estimate means economic losses of $50 to $80 million over 40 years. Harriet Tubman, the most famous conductor of the Underground Railroad, personally led about 70 people to freedom. The final blow. On December 18, 1865, the 13th Amendment to the Constitution was ratified. Neither slavery nor involuntary servitude shall exist in the United States. At that moment, the largest single destruction of private wealth in American history occurred. $3.5 billion in the value of enslaved people vanished instantly. For comparison, the Great Depression destroyed 25% of wealth over 4 years. The 2008 financial crisis destroyed 8% of wealth over 2 years. The abolition of slavery destroyed 16% of national wealth instantly. Collapse of the South. The Southern economy completely collapsed. Cotton production, 1861, 4.5 million bales. 1865, 300,000 bales, a decline of 93%. GDP per capita, 1860, $103, 100% of the U.S. average. 1870, 51% of the average, a decline of 50%. Banking system. Hundreds of Southern banks went bankrupt. Loans secured by slaves became unsecured. Massive defaults. The financial system stopped functioning. Northern banks also suffered. Remember, 40% of New York bank loans were tied to the South. Many of these loans were not repaid. Several banks went bankrupt. Others suffered huge losses. But the North recovered quickly. In 2 to 3 years. The South did not recover until the 1900s. It took 40 years to return to pre-war living standards. What did the freed people receive? Legal freedom. But nothing else. No land. During the war, General Sherman promised 40 acres and a mule to each freed family. But after Lincoln's assassination, President Johnson canceled this order. The land was returned to the former owners. No capital, no compensation, no loans, no assistance, no education. 90% of freed people were illiterate, but there were debts. Many were forced to return to work for former owners. This created the system of sharecropping. Sharecropping. Slavery by other means. A freed family rents a plot of land from a former slaveholder. The landowner provides seeds and tools on credit. The family works the land. At harvest, the landowner takes 50-70% as rent. Seems better than slavery. But in practice, the landowner controlled the scales and records, constantly manipulated the numbers in his favor. The family was always in debt. The debt carried over to the next year. Leaving was impossible. The debt kept them in place. This was a debt bondage. Sharecroppers remained in poverty for generations. The system existed until the 1960s, 100 years after the abolition of slavery. An economy built on violence. We have traveled from the Senate chamber in 1858, where Senator Hammond proclaimed Cotton King, through the financial halls of Wall Street and the plantation fields of Mississippi, to the moment when the entire system collapsed in 1865. The main conclusion: American slavery was not an archaic relic. It was a cutting-edge capitalist system of the 19th century with all its attributes: financial innovations, insurance, global supply chains, complex credit instruments. The only difference was one: the capital was human lives. Planters were not backward aristocrats. They were rationalizing entrepreneurs who maximized profit and optimized costs. The system was economically efficient. That did not make it right. The blame spreads wider. It is easy to place all the blame on Southern planters. But we have seen otherwise. Northern industrialists built textile empires on slave-picked cotton and resisted abolition. New York bankers financed the purchase of people and issued loans secured by human lives. British investors put capital into the system and collected dividends from plantations. European consumers wore cheap cotton clothing without thinking about its origin. The entire global economy of the mid-19th century was complicit. Incomplete emancipation. 1865 brought legal freedom. Economic freedom never came. 4 million people received nothing. No land, no capital, no education, no political power. The sharecropping system replaced chains with debt bondage. The economic gap between white and black Americans did not disappear. It solidified for generations. In 1860, enslaved people owned zero wealth by definition. This is no accident. It is a direct consequence of freed people not being given starting capital, while wealth grows faster than the economy. The initial gap does not shrink, it widens. 4 lessons for today. Economic efficiency does not equal moral rightness. The system of slavery was profitable and rational. Today we must ask questions about our economic systems. Efficient for whom and at whose expense? Economic systems create long-term consequences. Slavery ended in 1865, but its economic effects persist today. Globalization shifts responsibility across oceans, but does not eliminate it. The British consumer in 1850 was connected to a slave cotton picker. Today we are connected to a seamstress in Bangladesh and a factory worker in China. Legal changes without economic resources are insufficient. Emancipation without land or capital left people in a new form of dependency. Memory as an obligation. In 1858, Senator Hammond called Cotton king. He was right. Cotton ruled the world's economy. But the crown of this king was woven from chains, his throne stood on bones, his wealth was paid for with the blood of millions. We cannot change this history, but we are obliged to remember it, not as a distant past, but as the foundation on which the modern world was built. Every time we put on a cotton t-shirt, we carry the legacy of this history. Every time we admire New York's skyscrapers, we see wealth partially built on the slave trade. Every time we speak of the American dream, we must remember the 4 million people who were denied any dream at all. This is not a reason for guilt. It is a reason for responsibility. To remember, to understand, and to build a future where economic efficiency serves human dignity, not tramples it. Where progress is measured not only in GDP, but in the fairness of its distribution. The Cotton Empire fell in 1865, but the struggle for a just society, which it promised and failed to create, continues to this day. To remember the past is not to live in it. It is not to repeat it.